Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and the latest Operation Narai. Now this one is again tier 7 like Final Frontier or Ultimate Frontier as it's marked as now, because I'm guessing somebody at Wargaming realised that the Final Frontier is in fact the name of a Star Trek film. So yeah, they've done a little crafty renaming on the fly. So yeah, it's a lot more fun basically. It's a lot more linear, because you basically start off with this escort mission, and there's also a rather interesting new thing in that it has two possible primary win conditions. Now up till now we've had operations where there are secondary conditions where maybe you fail one secondary but then a new secondary condition will pop up, so it's still possible to get 5 stars potentially. But in this case it's actually the completion condition where you get a second go at it. So you've got the option of, you can either try and escort the ships, the transport ships, to the enemy base where the commandos will storm ashore, and if you get 1,800 of them ashore, if that many of them have survived, then at that point you've won. Now, like the Dunkirk mission, if the transport ships take hits, they will lose soldiers, so you have to protect them that far, and then you have to protect them once they're actually unloading as well. So it's relatively tricky to do. In this first game you're going to see that we do successfully do it, but there is a bit of a plot twist. This was literally my first game, by the way. This is the Sims with defensive AA, so I've got smokescreen but no speed boost, because the speed boost isn't really very useful for this particular operation. So the first condition is quite tricky to do, 1,800 troops ashore, just getting that many to survive, because you've only got a relatively small cushion of about 600 troops. And if you lose more than that, then that primary condition becomes impossible. But you can still complete it by then basically clearing out the enemy AI spawns. And if you can do that, then you can still complete it with 5 stars. Now, unlike other ones, all ships have to survive. There have been a couple of operations where if you get past a certain point, even if all the player ships get blown up, as long as there's still some AI ships around, it doesn't matter, you've still won. But that's not true for this one. If you lose all player ships, it doesn't matter if there's still AI ships. At that point you have lost. This is a bit of a replay bug here, by the way, this shift, press enter to enter the binocular view, or press to enter the binocular view even. Well done, brain, that was well passed. Yeah, I don't know. I went to make a cup of tea while I was recording this particular bit of footage, so I will notice when I get back, and I do try and toggle it off. But yeah, I'm not sure if this is a 915 replays problem or if this is specifically replays for this operation, because I did notice it in one of the other replays that I recorded as well, but I was more watching out for it. So apologies for that being there. It's a little bit annoying, but hopefully it's not too obtrusive. So we've basically had the first 2 spawns at this point. It seems to be mostly American and British ships, but there are some French cruisers mixed in with that as well. In fact, there's one French destroyer as well that there definitely will be, but the majority are British and American ships. The very first spawn you saw can either spawn on, what is it, like D1 or A5, so either side of those 2 islands that are the boundaries of the spawn area, and then you'll get a tier 5 battleship and a cruiser and a destroyer popping up from the south, and at that point you get a tier 6 battleship, and you also always seem to get the Missouri. The Missouri doesn't randomize, it's always a Missouri. I've seen a New Mex there, and I've seen a Queen Elizabeth. That is a Queen Elizabeth, in fact. So that's completely random. I've seen Iron Dukes instead of the New Yorks and vice versa. So there's a fair bit of randomization in terms of which specific ships will spawn, but the actual spawn areas, the only one that seems to randomize is that very first spawn, and the rest of it's fairly fixed. So it's relatively easy to predict where things are going to come from, unlike Ultimate Frontier, where one of the issues was that you could get 3 different possible spawn locations happening, across multiple waves. And if you got unlucky with some of those spawns, it could be very nasty. So this one's a lot more structured. It's a lot more possible to predict where things are coming from. And in a way it has to be, because they could have had things randomly spawning on your flank, but they tend to spawn ahead of you, which kind of makes more sense, because, it's like these are the defenders coming out of the base to try and deal with your invasion force. So this makes things a lot. It's a lot easier to predict where things are coming from. It's a lot easier to play it through once, know where the spawns are, and then act accordingly. So we've only lost a few troops so far. We've kept most of them alive. That Campbelltown's come out of the southern base area, which is where there's a bunch of transport ships that we will have to destroy as one of the secondary conditions. And some of those will look very familiar. Some of those are in fact ones that were used from the Dunkirk mission. So rather than just reuse the Liberty ship model, which you're already escorting a bunch of Liberty ships and then have to blow up even more Liberty ships, which you kind of do because some of the other base ships are Liberty ships. But no, they've actually added a little bit of variety and had some of the small ships from Dunkirk, which I thought was a nice touch. So we've reached the central base entrance, and this is the transport ships will tend to split up at this point. So you'll get a couple going down this central passage. You'll get a couple which will go through the northern passage. And there we go. I took out that Campbelltown, which was just sat still in the smoke apparently. And this is I've seen the Liberty ships, the transport ships doing like they don't always seem to distribute evenly. And in this particular one, we had one of them at the back, which I'm not sure if it was because of the wreck of that it was either a Scharnhorst or a Gneisenau, I can't remember which, but for some reason it has gotten itself into a position where it's having to sort of go south, but except it's going to circle back round and come through down the central passage again, all of which is going to mean that we have to hang around and wait for it to come back. So I think as a player you can absolutely do your best to try and not block the Liberty ships, because if they do that, that's going to be a bit of a pain. But in this case, I don't think it was any of the players, deliberately or inadvertently doing it. I think it was the pathfinding of the transport ships getting, or that one particular transport ship getting completely fouled up, and so it's now going round the houses pretty much. So when you come into the base area, you're always going to have 2 destroyers. You're going to have the Campbelltown, and then there's an Aigle, which is the French. Is it even released yet? I don't know, but the French tier 5 destroyer, I want to say it is, or is it tier 6? I don't know, but yeah, that kind of spawns over with the small ships. I think that is always that particular ship. I don't think that one randomizes. So you've got to be a little bit aware of torpedoes when you're coming in here, especially in a battleship. However, for me that's not such an issue because I'm in a fairly manoeuvrable destroyer. And I would say, as far as classes of ships goes, obviously the Germans are still very good because you're coming into this enclosed space where you're going to get things spawning. And so having those secondaries available is very, very useful. American destroyers, because they've got the turret traverse, you're going to need to react quickly. And if you've got an American destroyer like the Sims, or even a Mayhan Spect for AA, that could also be very useful. Russian destroyers, maybe not so much, just because you've got that turret traverse to contend with, and you are going to have things coming from potentially, well, not quite all sides, but you're going to have, times where you've got to quickly bring your guns around to bear, and it's just not going to be possible. So we've got one of the penultimate spawns now, so that brings with it another carrier. We've already dealt with, I haven't even mentioned the Ranger yet, but we've already dealt with the Ranger, which is a marked ship. You have to kill the Ranger as one of the secondary conditions. There is always an independence in this this next wave as well. There is a bit of randomization with exactly which ships you get. But this particular wave is basically tier 5 and tier 6, and then there's going to be a tier 7/8 wave following this one, so you're not quite done yet. So our Liberty ships, you can see on your minimap the locations where they are distributing themselves to. There is no automatic fail for losing Liberty ships. I think, well, if you lose all of them, you can still go and try and kill the bots, of course. But you lose a secondary star for if the lead Liberty ship gets killed, and that was the one that was providing the healing aura. So it's fairly obvious which one that is, and that in fact is the one that also goes and captures the base repair structure. So once it's done that, if it successfully does do that, you'll have a static repair area available as well, but it's kind of hard to make use of it. I've not had a single round yet where it's been possible to go and sit in that repair area, because by the time that happens, we're at this stage of the game and everything is completely, there's just a lot to deal with, and it all gets frenetic, and there's just no time to go and sit and heal. So that straggler Liberty ship is finally getting into position, but I mean, we've got the two northern ones already unloading, and I'm not sure at what point they decide, okay, we're going to go forwards and start unloading, but one of the other ones that came down the central passage took an awfully long time to get into position, even though it hadn't gone all around the houses. But it might just be because they are programmed to move forward in pairs, I don't know. So I was trying to maneuver to make a torp drop, completely miscalculated. I've managed to run myself aground, and now I'm just about dead, unfortunately. I'm going to get more torps away, but I don't think I actually get any hits with these ones. So of the final wave, there pretty much seems to always be a hood, and the Atlantis seems to be fairly fixed as well. In fact, I think the final wave is completely fixed, because the Fiji and the Chapayev I've also seen always be in that final wave. So I think the final wave is a fixed spawn. There's no variation in it. So there we go. I'm just about dead, hanging on by an absolute thread. And in fact, I did get one more torp hit, so that's not too bad. 145k damage is all right. Meanwhile, we're steadily ticking up with the amount of troops being unloaded. And because we're taking the focus, it means that the Liberty ships aren't taking too much fire. But the bad news is we're down to only 2 ships now, and they're both squashy cruisers. The Miyoko just dives in, which is a sure recipe to die, which they do. And, well, the Straws is unfortunately going to run themselves aground. So, this is not looking so good. But we're very close on that 1,800 troops. Unfortunately, not close enough. Now, if the Straws had angled away, they might have lived a bit longer, and, well, there you go, operation failed. All task force warships were destroyed, even though the Liberty ships were still alive. But then it says operation completed, because it just ticked over to the 1,800 troops. We did, in fact, lose that, though. We lost it with all secondaries completed, but it was still a loss. Just because the Straws didn't last a couple more seconds. Or really, we can put the blame on that Liberty ship that went round the houses and didn't start unloading sooner. That was the real culprit. So this is the final part from my actual 5-star run. This is the Saipan, and I have good news. If you're a carrier player, you can actually usefully take a carrier in this one, because it's that mix of American and British ships. There's far fewer AA ships around. Far fewer. And for the Saipan in particular, the Missouri for the initial part is the thing with the toughest AA that you'll face. It's really only when you get to the final wave with the Chapayev. I think the second to last final can have a Pensacola. There's a Cleveland at some point as well. So you start to get defensive AA cruisers coming in towards the end, and the Atlanta especially is a big problem. I actually end up getting a squad wiped to the Atlanta at one point. We've also got, I'll note here, an AFK Indianapolis, who wasn't AFK for the first part, but then went and parked themselves by an island. So we've actually only got myself and 2 other ships left alive at the moment, and one of the Scharnhorsts is not going to last that long. We lost enough troops as well that getting the 1,800 troops landed was an impossibility from fairly early on. So now we just have to try and kill everything, and there you go. You don't get the drop circles in replays, or the drop indicators, but I'm trying to avoid the defensive fires, and of course the Hood has a defensive as well, but that doesn't matter so much for the torp bombers. but it's still annoying. So yeah, it's the Atlanta I'm mainly concerned about, but of course the Chapayev also has a defensive, and it limits what you can do at the end. So carriers are more useful in the early part, and towards the end you're stuck waiting for defensive fires to cool down and for your allies to try and kill things with defensive fire. And even without defensive fire, that Atlanta is just incredibly dangerous anyway. As to the carriers that are the most useful in this, probably the two premiums. Hiryu seems like a fairly safe bet, and if you are taking the Saipan, don't bother with the fighter setup. That's just a complete waste of time. There is absolutely no reason to take the dive bombers when you can like with the tier 7 cruisers that players tend to take. There's usually at least one decent AA cruiser anyway, so the fighters you get from having a not a fighter setup in the Saipan, just the standard setup, you know, 2 squads of fighters is fine. And of course in the Ranger you don't get a choice these days. So that was it, 5 stars with 2 ships remaining, but only 1 really, because 1 was AFK. The rewards are kind of like the ones for Ultimate Frontier. I was struggling not to say Final Frontier. It's kind of ingrained at this point. It's for the first 3 stars, you've got a mix of camos and flags. I think the 3rd star is camos, and it's actually camos I don't think you've been able to get in the game before, so it's a new camo for 3 stars. 4 stars is 10k Captain XP, or is it 10k free XP and 17k Elite Captain XP? I think it's that way around. And then 5 stars is a day of premium. So no captains again, as with Final... see, I did it that time. As with Ultimate Frontier, but the rewards are still fairly decent. So lastly, and this is a little unusual, me having a 3rd and final bit of replay footage, but this is one from the stream where I was just trying out a battleship and I picked the KGV because why not? It's got a fairly rapid rate of fire and the AA is actually not completely terrible. Although, of course, it's the mid to short range AA which does get rather wrecked by things like bombs and HE spam. So we're joining this just as we're starting to enter the base. This time we didn't have the Liberty ships taking all kinds of weird and wacky routes, so they're actually all kind of entering more or less at the same time. We do, however, have looks like our 3 cruisers all going for the transport ships, which is not really necessary. I think 1 at most would do. So taking a bit of attention. Now unfortunately in this one the Ranger has gotten away, and what will happen with that is the Ranger goes and hides in J8. There's a little like alcove, a little bay that it can tuck itself into out the line of fire. So you have to specifically go and hunt it down if it gets itself to there. So not only have we got the Independence, but we've also got the Ranger's air attacks to deal with, which is going to make things significantly harder. We're starting to land some of the troops, but yeah, just the fact that we've had cruisers go off chasing the transport ships. Actually, I think one of them pulled back. Yeah, the Algerie actually is in the main base area, so that's fortunate. But yeah, that's going to, you know, we don't have quite as much firepower available, so that's going to be a little bit awkward. And I'm now also myself in a slightly awkward position because taken a buttload of damage, and it's and this is where something like the Hood would kind of suck, or anything like Nagato maybe as well. Just anything with a really terrible turning radius is maneuvering within this relatively enclosed space to try and avoid torpedoes is a bit tricky. So yeah, certain battleships are definitely preferable over others. The Germans, absolutely. This is not too bad. I would say Nelson's maybe not too bad, but probably not the best thing you could take. I'm trying to think what else. You know, Ashitaka would be an absolute no-no, probably. What else is there? I don't know. Colorado, of course it's Colorado. Colorado I think might just be a bit too slow, although it's very maneuverable. I don't know, Colorado might actually be okay, because of course Colorado's also got fairly decent AA. Anyway, so we're getting the final wave at this point with the Hood spawning, and Chapayev, the Fiji, and the Atlanta. And we're starting to... I mean, with 3 ships down, we're starting to seriously lose some troops as well. We're now below the 1800 threshold, so we have to kill everything once again if we want to be in with a chance of doing this. And the fact that we haven't been able to kill the aircraft carrier before he was able to get into his little hidey hole means that we're probably not going to get that as a secondary condition either. So myself and the Nelson are taking all kinds of a battering at the moment, and I was actually a little bit worried about things dropping torps on me, but the most immediate threat is actually this New York, but I think he's focusing on the Nelson. We've also got planes coming in, but again, I think they're mostly going for the Nelson, which is a good thing for me because, yeah, I'm not exactly in a place where I can maneuver very well at the moment. And because they're American torpedo bombers, they drop a spread of 6. So it's quite nasty to, like, even if you're maneuvering well, it's quite nasty to try and avoid them. Not quite sure why I was firing so much HE at this point, by the way. This kind of point-blank range, AP would have been better for a lot of the targets, but maybe I was just giving the HE a go to see how effective it would be, or maybe I just hadn't noticed that I was still firing the HE. Although, it being British HE, it's still doing respectable amounts of damage, because British AP is completely balanced. So the Atlanta's in pretty bad shape, the Miyoko's in pretty bad shape. We've just lost the Nelson, and this is starting to look like a bit of a struggle. I think the Atlanta was trying to maybe get into the repair bay, but as I said, I've never seen anyone successfully use that. I've never been able to successfully use that. So, yeah, you might get an opportunity to just sneakily drive through it, but I very much doubt you're going to be able to make particularly effective use of it. Now, fortunately for me, those are Chapayev torps, so they just ran out of range, and for some reason the Atlanta, I think the Atlanta was programmed to save its torps for the transport, so I was able to just completely blap him. Now, I'm now completely alone. I've got 1 carrier still. You know, we killed the Independence, but I've got that Ranger still going after me. There's maybe a chance I can do the same thing to the Chapayev that I did to the Atlanta, but as it turns out, there's only 1 Citadel and 1 pen and 3 overpens, so I get a little unlucky with my RNG there. If those 3 overpens had been regular penetrations instead, that might have been a slightly nicer result. So I've been forced back into the passage, 1 remaining Liberty ship, which again, it took a bit of a weird route. Sometimes the Liberty ships take a bit of a weird route. I think it's just because it's like a relatively crowded area that they're trying to go through. You might yourselves observe some real weirdness with the Liberty ships, and as in that first one, you know, it can potentially have an impact. Did you notice that bot team kill, by the way? The Ranger managed to strike the New York with a torp at some point, and it flooded out, so yeah. Now, that was me just having a quick check of my remaining AA when I was recording the replay, and as you maybe caught a glance of there, it's down to maybe like a 1/3. So yeah, my ability to do much about the air attacks is significantly reduced at this point, but the much more immediate problem is this Fiji. Now, if I get lucky and I'm aiming well enough, you know, it's a Fiji, I can just annihilate it potentially, and the fact that he's run himself aground is very useful. But my angling's not optimal. The reason I kind of slowed and turned was to avoid torps, and I managed to successfully do that, but it also gave a broadside to the Fiji. And he's now just hammering away. So, come on, RNGers. And no. Well, okay, that was just rather unlucky. I've got maybe 1 more chance to kill this Fiji before he kills me, because with his rate of fire, 1 more chance is all I'm going to get. So I'm turning away, but he can still, of course, hit my superstructure, get the rear turrets out, cross my fingers, and... whew, okay, there we go. It's a Citadel, and actually, you know, I got my final heal in just in time to not die. There is, however, still an angry carrier to deal with. Now, he's down severely on dive bombers, but he's still got at least full squads of torp bombers available. And so here he comes for the drop, and then completely messes up. And I don't know if it's just because I turned in or because I was this close to land, but rather than try and reposition round to the other side, it dropped its torpedoes on the beach for the most part, so that was fine. Now, we're down to less than a minute. I've got one chance at maybe doing this if the Chapayev has come this way. Spotted from the air, so there's going to be planes coming fairly soon. And, well, any second now, we'll see what this Chapayev is. Oh, and he's here. He has actually come this way. And, boop, there we go. So with less than 20 seconds on the clock, I killed the final bot of that wave, and it was really only the aircraft carrier that was left alive. You don't have to kill the aircraft carrier to complete it. It's just a secondary. So 221,000 damage done. 23 plane kills, and I don't even know what the PvE medals are, but I got 2 of those. 1976 base XP, almost 2,000 base XP, and it wasn't even a 5-star, because of course how much XP you get does kind of correlate to how many stars you've gotten. And there you go, you can see the damage done to individual targets, mostly AP, but I got like nearly 70k from the HE shells I was firing as well, and a reasonably healthy 223,000 credits profit, so that's not too bad. And of course, if you're taking a premium ship and you have a really good damage game, then you can probably do even better money-wise. And I mean, that Saipan game, for example, you know, bear in mind I'm a complete scrub and I had less than, what was it, only 120 odd K at the end of that one? 119,000. A skilled player in a Saipan or a Hiryu or something like that could certainly do a lot better. So that's it. Operation Narai, a lot more straightforward and a lot more fun. You know, I think the big issue with the first iteration of Ultimate Frontier was just the sheer amount of randomization, the stuff that could just come at you from almost all angles, just made it a complete scramble, whereas this one nicely ramps up in difficulty till you get to that ending zone and you're all in this little like killing bottle, and at which point it gets kind of a bit frenetic, but in a good way, as opposed to Ultimate Frontier, where it was just being fired upon from all angles and desperately scrabbling to secure the flanks and buy time for the transport aircraft to get away. So this one feels a lot more satisfying as a player, and I can't imagine they'll need to tweak it too much compared to Ultimate Frontier for future times when it's in the rotation. So hopefully you found this video useful, and if you did, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.